Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy you guys are all here. Yay. Okay, good. Hi. Yeah, go ahead, please. If you have your cameras to turn on, that will be delightful. Hello, Alexa. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to see you all here. Welcome. And you guys, I have here an amazing, amazing woman. This is Virginia Willcock. Everybody wave and say hello.
Hi. How are we all?
So Virginia is obviously joining us today from Australia, which is actually tomorrow on our calendar, isn't it?
It is. It's in the morning. It's very early in the morning for tasting.
Is it really? Is it really? Wait, what time is it actually?
Well, it's 9 a.m.
Oh, shoot. I totally thought it was later than that. Oh, my God.
It's fun. I love tasting wine in the morning. It's the best time. Your palate's sharp.
Oh, just perfect. And a little, no, don't even have some breakfast before that. Just make sure you get the wine
Exactly.
in.
Only liquid before midday.
Oh, gosh, absolutely. So welcome, everyone. So obviously, I'm very excited to have Virginia here, and we're gonna just get into it right away and have so much to learn and so much to see. We've got pictures today, everyone. You know, sometimes I've got them, sometimes I don't. Today, I've got a lot of awesome ones that we're gonna show. But I want to start off by letting everyone know kind of the order. For those of you who have the wines, which will be very exciting, we're going in a bit of a reverse order today with our tastings. So we are actually going to be starting off with the Tom Cullity Cabernet blend. So that is the first wine we're going to be tasting. Then we're going to go to the Cabernet Sauvignon, and then we're going to discuss the Chardonnay. Isn't that exciting?
I love the way everyone's swapping glasses.
I know. Do you like that? It just kind of happened. So, but first, I'm gonna pelt Virginia with fun questions that I really wanted to ask her, and then I'm gonna let her get started. But you guys know the drill. Please, if you have any interest in jumping in and getting into the chat box to ask questions, please do. You know, I absolutely love them, and I will be monitoring that while Virginia is talking. So you have plenty of opportunity to do that and ask anything you have. And so today with Virginia, hello. So we are in a beautiful part of Australia, which is Western Australia. Margaret River, yes. And are you originally from Margaret River?
I'm originally from Perth, which is about 300 kilometres north of Margaret River. So that's our nearest capital city.
Yeah. And I was reading that your family actually had vineyards that you grew up on too. Is that right? Was it in Perth or just north?
It was more of a hobby farm, but it was north of Perth. Margaret River was a long way south when I was a child. So it was more of a hobby farm that my dad and a few friends bought a vineyard and grew grapes and just started making wine. It was just for fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Was the wine any good?
Look, I think it was pretty good, but I was so young, you know, I was in my early teens and I couldn't tell a good wine from a bad wine back then.
But was that sort of the impetus for you to kind of get into winemaking too, though?
Yeah, definitely. But it was the sort of seasonal change. I was always the one who put my hand up to go up to the vineyard with Dad and check things and do some work. And I just loved being out there. I loved being in the vineyard. And then when you sort of saw that, you know, the grapes get harvested and they'd all invite all of their friends, and it was a massive camping event where everybody would come to the vineyard and pick the grapes, and you drink the vintage prior. Yeah. And everyone was drunk and everyone was happy and they were working hard and playing hard. And I just went, this is living, you know. It was beautiful freedom. It was so great.
Absolutely. I read one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, just because I think it's super interesting. When you started winemaking, you traveled around and you worked in vintages in different places, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, it was kind of, Australian winemakers were quite legendary as high technology winemakers. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of sort of Eastern European countries or old wineries and things like that in Europe that they wanted to get these technically trained Australian winemakers and fly them into Europe and clean the wines up, so to speak.
Is that what you were a cleaner?
Well, we were called flying winemakers, but yeah, we were there to make, you know, clean, polished wines. I have to say I've evolved a lot since then. I'm all about the funk.
Yes, the funk. I'm happy with the funk. My biggest question was actually, I was very curious about what the vintage was like in Albania.
Oh, absolute disaster. Literally, I was there 2 years after the communists had been overthrown, and the communists had destroyed so many of the vineyards and orchards. There weren't many vineyards left standing there, but I worked for an English marketing company who wanted to make the first Albanian wine in the English market.
Wow.
So I spent my time in Albania trying to get fruit, trying to buy fruit. They didn't understand money. They'd never worked with money before. It was literally like going back 100 years in time and trying to make wine. It was unbelievable.
How long were you there? I mean, were you there for the full harvest or vintage, or how long?
No, I was only there for about 4 weeks, but we couldn't secure any fruit. It was there was what we thought was picked. A lot of the growers would then go and, you know, we'd say, we're coming to pick the fruit tomorrow and we're paying you, and then they'd go and pick it overnight because they didn't understand what they were going to do with money and no grapes. So they'd harvest the grapes for themselves and turn it into their own, what they called a raki, like a spirit. So they had something to trade instead of like money they didn't understand. So we kept getting, like, you know, there was 4 or 5 different situations where the grapes that we thought we'd secured, we couldn't get.
Wow.
It was bizarre, totally bizarre.
I was not even expecting that, but I'm really, really fascinated by that story. Holy cow. I mean, I was just sort of curious what the wine scene was like in Albania, but like, it sounds like there's really not much of one to work with, which is kind of crazy.
No.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and bring up right now some of the pictures, and I'd love to start talking about whatever, whenever you'd like, but about Margaret River, about Vasse Felix, which has a really interesting origin of name, I feel like, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll probably get into that with Tom Cullity.
Perfect.
But I really want to explain to you the region, because this is one of the most exceptional places on earth. Perth, the city where I grew up, is actually the most isolated capital city in the world. It's classified as the most isolated capital city in the world. And then when you land in Perth, you still have to drive 300 kilometres south, or a 3-hour drive south. And there's this beautiful cape that sticks out in the ocean. And it was in the sort of 1950s that the southwest of Western Australia was considered a great place for grapes. But in the mid-60s, a research scientist came down to Margaret River, and he was doing some work with the soils and the climate for lupins. But he looked at this region and just started assimilating the climate and said, this region is actually really similar to Bordeaux. Very gravelly, well-drained soils with a maritime influence. So he decided to call this region somewhere that might be a region of exceptional wine growing. And it was only a year later that Tom Cullity ended up getting some cuttings from around the Perth region and brought them down to Margaret River. So one of the most special thing, and I think it's really important to point out, we're 3 sides of ocean. It's almost an island, this cape. Yeah. It's a Mediterranean climate. So we actually have warm, dry summers and cool, wet winters, which is absolutely perfect. We get a lot of rain in winter. We're beautiful recharge of the land during the winter months. But over the summer months, the really well-drained soils drain away. The vines grow to a moderate height. We have quite low yields here, but they have a moderate sized grapevine. But the magic happens when you've got beautiful sunshine every day, but you think Mediterranean climate, why aren't we growing Mediterranean varieties? Because there's sun every day and it's dry. But our most prevailing wind actually comes from the southwest. So it comes from that big cold ocean and blows across the region. And while it's blowing across the region, it's cooling the fruit down. So you have this almost cooling refrigeration effect on the fruit, while they're ripening beautifully in the sunshine, you get a cooling effect on the fruit. So we have the amazing effect of being able to preserve beautiful fruit flavour while getting the grapes physiologically ripe.
Yeah.
So it creates this sort of magic and the ability to grow Chardonnay and Cabernet in this one region. And that's why we've decided to specialise on those two varieties.
So out of curiosity, what is kind of like your range of temperatures? Like in the summertime, how hot does it get versus in the wintertime?
Our average, and I'm going to be talking degrees Celsius, someone's going to have to get their converter out. But our average, we're usually around sort of 25 to 30 degrees on a summer's day. Mm-hmm. And in winter, it's only down to about, we're in 10 to 15 degrees on a winter's day. Okay. So the difference between summer and winter is not massive. We don't get frost and cold temperatures. And it's because we're so close to the ocean that we have the moderating effect of the ocean, because the ocean temperature changes less than land temperature.
And then, of course, that wind that's coming up from the south is like, does that happen at a certain time of day, kind of that you notice the most? Is it sort of an afternoon or evening or all the time?
No, it's mostly in the afternoon. The wind comes in.
Perfect.
So you think the south of Margaret River is the Antarctica, and all of the weather comes in a clockwise pattern out of the Antarctica and it circles upwards. So the weather patterns are always coming across the ocean. But when you have, the cold desert inland from Australia, in the morning we get light easterlies that come from cold desert out to the sea. Mm-hmm. And then as the desert starts warming up, the sea breeze pulls across the region and heads towards the desert. And we have no mountains, no hills on the eastern side of us.
None
so the breeze just keeps flowing. It just keeps blowing across the land.
And there's no sort of coastal ranges there or anything, right? It's just all kind of flat in the area. Yeah. Or
what's interesting, it's very, very ancient rock that basically formed this cape. And there is a bit of a ridge. So when you actually head to the coastline, particularly in the northern part of the cape, mm-hmm. you'll actually go down and it's quite cliff. It's very rocky and cliff-faced. If you go to the next slide, actually, the ocean has got a lot of that sort of rocky, rocky, cliffy edge. So it goes up quite quickly and it's very, very hard rock and it's very old land. And this old land, you've got to remember, we have no mountains, so we have no volcanoes, no new soil created by, volcanic new landmass. We don't have floods, so there's no earth sort of pouring over and causing big riverbanks and things like that. Everything's very moderate here. And the land over millions of years has just gradually eroded and builds itself up. And, it's a very, very delicate aging process and it's a very, very slow aging process. So the land is millions and millions of years old.
So what's your main soil type that you find? I imagine the soils kind of change throughout the vineyards, right? Or is it all kind of more or less consistent?
Yeah, no, there's definitely some change in soil. So obviously some of the more ancient soils have like a gravel loam. So it's gravel peas. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you go to the next slide, I think we've got some Cabernet. Oh, go to the next one. Sorry.
But this is beautiful, you guys, right? I mean,
I'm going backwards.
That's okay.
So if you see that soil picture on the left-hand side, the very top layer has got little pebbles in it, mm-hmm. and it's not a heavy, deep, loamy soil. It's quite a sandy, gravelly soil. And then underneath that is a very, very dense clay. So for us, this is perfect Cabernet soil because the Cabernet roots, they don't have a deep, it's about, usually our Cabernet soil's 1.5 to half a metre deep of that gravel loam. So over summer, they drain very, very well, but some of their roots get into the clay and that clay holds just enough moisture for them to sustain themselves over the summer months. So
Yeah,
No?
I'm so sorry I'm getting feedback again. I have no idea why, you guys. I apologize. It's super awkward though. Thanks, Virginia, for being a trooper.
Sorry.
But what I was just going to ask is too, because we were talking about that, because you get most of your rain in the winter time, so it's kind of so important for that clay to hold the moisture, so the vines can drink something in the hot months in the summer.
That's
in the
right.
Dry months. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the rain in the winter months, like it's incredible, the growth in the land. Like we have beautiful vegetation. And I think when most of this region, over 60% of this region is natural forest. So it's beautiful natural environment. You've got this incredible coastal area, and you've got this, like, the freshest air you could possibly imagine. It's quite incredible. So the smell, and this is one of the things that I want to bring into the sort of Cabernet perfumes, because to me, the smell of the forest, the smell of the sea, the smell of that beautiful gravelly loam, you know, that stony gravelly loam, all of those characteristics to me are transparent in the wines. And I think it's a really, really beautiful thing. And when we're crafting our wines, we don't want our wines to be big and fruity and heavy, you know. We want the wines to be transparent, to be able to see the environment. So it's a really important part of who we are and how we look at our Cabernets. So it's probably worth looking at the Tom Cullity Cabernet, is it?
Yes, I think it is. Absolutely. We should start that. So everyone, if you have the Tom Cullity, so this is sort of the iconic sort of benchmark wine that you make, correct? In terms of your portfolio and kind of the red Cabernets of, you know, of Vasse Felix.
That's exactly right. So Tom Cullity was the man who planted the Vasse Felix vineyard. And I said he brought the cuttings down from Perth. Now, the cuttings of Cabernet and Malbec in Western Australia have been in Western Australia since 1854. Wow. So they've just been grown along the Swan River around the Perth area. And it took until 1967 before Tom brought them down to this region. And they're ancient old clones from pre-phylloxera Bordeaux. So when you look at our Cabernets, it's ancient clones. It's grown in beautiful, ancient old ground. And the way we're making it is as naturally as possible. It's all wild fermented. We make them with a beautiful transparency, lots of oxidative handling. And for me, the Tom Cullity comes from the most special parcels of Cabernet and Malbec we have here. So it's based on the original plantings that Tom planted of Cabernet and Malbec in 1967.
Wow.
And these old vines have been growing here, and they're so consistent. They're so happy in this environment, and they have this beautiful perfume, beautiful restraint about them. And it's really interesting. This is our top wine, our most unique. It's our smallest make. And it's really important that I think a lot of people think that your top wine is your biggest and that, you know, the biggest is the best. But for us, that's absolutely not the case. Our top wine is our most rare, sophisticated and pure example of what we do here at Vasse Felix. And it comes from the origin and the history of Tom Cullity, the first vines, and this beautiful piece of land, which is only 4 kilometres from the ocean. So it's 4 kilometres from the ocean, and the sea breeze blows beautifully across these vines, and it just holds this beautiful perfume. And I think one of the most important things is the texture of this wine.
So I think wine in particular, I think that we've got, so obviously we're a blend. We're not just Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm so curious about how old these vines are that you use for this particular blend. But I also would like to point out, we had this conversation a little bit earlier. I have a question already from the group about screw caps and how having the higher end wines with a screw cap is not something we're used to seeing here, and talking about that, if you have a moment, after we discuss the gorgeous texture of this incredible blend that we're about to drink. So it is super perfumed and just beautifully, beautifully rich on the nose. Just such great fruit and beautiful kind of like aromas overall.
Yeah, I think it bears to mention too that there are perfumes in this that are so hard to understand from, I guess, anywhere else in Australia or anywhere in the US, because there's certain plants and trees in this region that aren't found anywhere else in the world. And what I pick up in this a lot is what I call the peppy tree, or wanil, the Aboriginals used to call it. It's a beautiful plant that just has this perfume. It's a slight eucalypt, but more peppermint. It's a beautiful fragrance, but you get that woodsy forest perfume. And that we always talk about, in fact, I was talking to a journalist the other day about the Tom Cullity. He said it's almost like an ozone freshness, like the sea breeze that you can smell. It's like it's got a purity and a cleanliness about it, but it's not without having power in any way. You know, it has a real presence. I mean, clearly the Cabernet perfumes are there, just, you know, slight hints of blackcurrant, but we talk more about red berries.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you know, red currant and, you know, cranberry and just more delicate perfumes of Cabernet here. And this to me is what ancient Cabernet used to smell and taste like. It was beautiful, you know. So on the palate, I think one of the most incredible things is the ripeness of tannin. There's a sheer volume of tannin and a dryness that happens, because you should have that when you finish a taste of Cabernet. But the tannins are so fine. They're so powdery, talky. And I think there's a beautiful juiciness and a plumpness to the fruit. Everything's in beautiful balance for me. So it still has this power and tannin texture, but it's in the most sophisticated form. And to me, this has to be our top wine from these old vines, because it's very hard to find that level of balance and sophistication that's expressed from the vineyards. And that's why it is Tom Cullity, and that's why we gave this wine Tom's name.
So actually, when Tom, you said planted the first vines. I'm blanking now. Is 1967 or 62? 67. I was right the first time, right? Yes, excellent. How long have you been the lead winemaker here at Vasse Felix? We actually haven't talked.
I've been here. Yeah, I've been here 14 years.
What? Amazing.
So, well, Margaret River, when I finished university, I actually decided that I'd done a couple of vintages, you know, one in South Australia, and then I came to Margaret River to do a vintage and went, oh my God, this place is incredible. Like the beach, the forest, the quality of wine that we were making. And this is very early days. When I came to Margaret River, it was 1991. And it was only just beginning as a wine region that people were going, it was turning heads in Australia going, what is that place called Margaret River? What are they doing? They seem to be making beautiful wine. So it was only at the beginning of its journey. And then I travelled overseas, but kept coming back to Margaret River. So I think this year is my 30th vintage in Margaret River.
Oh my God.
I think for me, starting at Vasse Felix, I started at Vasse Felix because Vasse Felix has these beautiful old vines of Cabernet and Malbec. I had a real passion for Margaret River Cabernet because I think it's one of the most sophisticated and beautiful Cabernets in the world. They're not big, massive wines, but they're very powerful. So I think to me, it's a very unique proposition. And I think it's been, you know, forgotten in the world of Cabernet that Cabernet can be elegant, fine, shapely and sophisticated without being big and heavy. And I think that's what I learned. The beauty of Cabernet was drinking those old Bordeaux, you know, when you could afford them, right?
Yeah.
Just can't afford them anymore.
No, not anymore. Certainly not. But, you know, this is part of, I think this speaks to, it speaks to those old Bordeaux, but it also to me speaks to so much more. I love the sort of layers of this. And also because it's so layered and elegant, but also very, very approachable in the sense that it makes me so happy. It makes me smile to drink it and to taste it and to experience it, you know? And I feel like not all wines can do that. So I just think it's absolutely beautiful. And then of course, moving, because we do have 2 Cabernets, but we have with the Tom Cullity. So you were saying, so these vines are some of the oldest vines that you have on the property, right? For the Tom Cullity that we use. And then then we're moving in so the Cabernet Sauvignon though, what's the difference, I think, between that in terms of the production and or whatnot, you know, between the 2 cabs?
Yeah, look, they're effectively made the same way. They're all wild fermented, whole berry ferment. We're very, very gentle. We use a lot of oxygen in the production of our wines. But the difference really is our Cabernet Sauvignon is what I call our sort of premier cru blocks. So you know how, you know, areas that are hundreds of years old have classified their land and they understand. And I always look to Burgundy because it's I think it's an easy system, your village, premier cru, grand cru. Mm-hmm. Within our vineyards, we have a very sort of similar approach. And as a winemaker, I ferment every block that we have on our property separately so that I can understand what its potential is going forward. So we get to a point where we're now, you know, with the Cabernet Sauvignon, there are premier cru blocks. So, you know, only about 25% of our vineyard land can do that quality of Cabernet. So premier cru plots, it has the power and the density of great Cabernet. In fact, in some ways, it's actually a deeper, richer Cabernet Sauvignon. And effectively, I guess from a fermentation point of view, very similar technique. We leave the Cabernets on skins for up to 30, 35 days. And what we do is get to a very, very stable tannin position with our Cabernets. I respect every block we have and treat it the best it possibly can. And it's just, for me, it's about understanding how that block wants to be in fermenter and how much tannin we want to get out of it, how quickly do those tannins stabilise. So I think for me, the oxygen during fermentation, the tannin extraction is very important, and stabilising those tannins before you take them off skins. Then it goes to oak, and we age them in oak for, it could be anywhere from 15 to 18 months, depending on the vintage and how intense that vintage is. And then we bottle it, and we release the Cabernet after 12 months in bottle, but we release the Tom Cullity after 2 years in bottle. And I'm sort of leading into this production technique because it's really important to understand how and why you can use a screw cap.
Thank you. You see everything coming all together. You did not forget. I love it.
Yeah. Because for me, a screw cap is as good as the very best cork you can buy. It's a perfect seal. And a great cork is a perfect seal. The difference in cork is that you can't rely on every cork being a perfect seal. So you do get variation. And as a winemaker, I don't want to rely on a cork to finish the aging process when I can't control every cork. What I can control is my process and getting it to bottle in the perfect form so that it ages as if every cork was perfect. And that's what a screw cap can do. So the use of oxygen and the stabilisation of tannin and getting the wine to bottle when it's genuinely ready is very important. And I think in Margaret River, we can do this better than anyone because our Cabernets are beautifully approachable young. And I think we can, you can open a bottle of quite youthful Margaret River Cabernet. I mean, look at that Tom Cullity. It's, it's not very old and it's beautiful, and you could just drink it straight up. The Cabernet Sauvignon as well. But the beauty about a screw cap is the wine will continue to age. Wine is a living thing. It has living chemistry. It will evolve. It doesn't need variable amounts of oxygen to change it. it will change in the bottle. So what I find, it will change slower though, as a perfect cork will. So yeah, so I think for me, when we bottle our wines, they're beautiful young. We still age them in bottle because in a 2-year period of like Tom Cullity sitting in bottle, you will see the wine harmonise more, stabilise more and evolve because the chemistry changes in wine as it ages. It's a natural product. So it's still got that evolution. What we do believe though is that you can, say you buy a dozen, you can put them in the cellar, you can lose them in the cellar. But for me, a case of Tom Cullity, you'll either keep drinking them in the first few years because they're just delicious young. But if you forgot about that Tom Cullity in your cellar for 10 to 15, even 20 years, you would still be able to pull a bottle of that Tom Cullity out and it would be unbelievably great. And it will still have aged Cabernet characters. You'll still see cigar boxy characters starting to come in. The fruit subsides because the fruit ages, you know. So you will see wines evolve. So for me, it's totally reliable. I mean, if you're in the production industry, if you were, say you were packeting up Mars bars and, you know, 10% of the wrappers didn't seal and you had to throw 10% of them out, you wouldn't do it, would you? You get a new wrapper, which is exactly what we've done. 10% of our corks were not good enough.
So I feel like Australia was on the forefront too of all the research for screw caps as well. So you said, I think that we were talking earlier, you guys went to this transition to screw caps from corks around 2005, 2006, do you say, or 2004, 2005, right?
2004 to 2006, yep.
Okay. And so, I mean, obviously you have those bottles in your library behind you that are aging. What's the potential, as long as a cork, longer than a cork, for a screw cap to hold that wine as it develops? Longer
than a cork. Yeah. Excellent. Corks will deteriorate over time.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, you know, your storage conditions are obviously absolutely critical, you know, and a perfect cork will last forever.
Yeah, true.
But I don't know how many there are. There is a bit of honesty in the Australian industry. We grew very quickly in Australia and the cork industry couldn't keep up with supply. So they did send us less than great corks. So we had to change. We had to find a better seal because we couldn't rely on the cork industry to supply us with a good seal for our wines.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting. I think that, I have some questions here for you too, as we continue to talk about the beautiful, the Vasse Felix Cabernet Sauvignon as well, which is, so you're saying basically this is kind of a Premier Cru, whereas the Cullity might be more of a Grand Cru and this is more of the Premier Cru, if you will, of the portfolio.
Exactly.
Yes, and this is 100% Cabernet and there's no blend in this, is that correct?
No, that's not true. There is some Malbec and a little bit of Petit Verdot.
Fantastic.
So because of our heritage with Malbec, we do blend a little bit of Malbec in all of our Cabernets, to be honest, because I guess that it's a bit of an estate style for us, but also regionally, Malbec performs brilliantly here. Not every region can grow Malbec well.
No.
Malbec doesn't graft well onto American rootstock. And if you're in a region that has had phylloxera, you have to use American rootstock. Margaret River has never had phylloxera. So all of our vines are on their own roots. Wow. So we have, and these ancient cuttings of Malbec are planted on their own roots in Margaret River soil. So it is quite a unique and beautiful thing.
I think that's, I really feel like, and I'd love your opinion on this, but I feel like as a winemaker, do you find that wines that are grown from grapes, made from grapes grown on their own rootstock, do you have a different profile than those grafted onto others? Just curious.
Yeah, look, there's no question that rootstock will change the performance potential of a vine. And that's what it's designed for. Sometimes it makes them more drought resistant, sometimes it makes them salt resistant, but almost in all cases, it increases the yield. And we have very low yields on own rooted vines. And they, you know, they perform beautifully. And I feel like there's a real truth to these ancient clones grown on Margaret River soil. I mean, I think probably everybody there would understand that our Cabernets are truly Margaret River in style. They're not like Cabernets you'll find from California. They're not like, you know, the modern day Bordeaux. They're not like Cabernets from anywhere else in the world. And I think it makes it a really beautiful proposition. And I think the transparency of our Cabernet is so important. The reason we're tasting Cabernet first is because it's such an intellectual variety that I think it's important to wear yourself out on Cabernet first, because when you put it in your mouth, you feel the shape of Cabernet. You feel the succulence, you feel where the tannins are, the length of flavour, those little savoury nuances that come through. They're the beautiful complexities of wine that I think we get excited about. And I want to see, Cabernet has a lower acidity than whites as a rule. So have your Cabernet first when you're doing a tasting, lower acid first, feel the tannin texture, feel the shape of the wine, and then move on to the whites, which have an acid polishing ability, and they're much easier to comprehend because they're all over your palate.
Absolutely. So there's a request. Would you be willing, Virginia, to share from your point of view the difference in tastes between your two Cabernets? If just like a brief little summary of the Cullity versus the Vasse Felix.
Yeah, so we're obviously looking at different vintages here as well.
Yes.
The Tom Cullity for me is in a really beautiful place in its age. I mean, it's a 5-year-old wine now, and it's starting to get those beautiful savoury nuances. And I'm a big believer in savoury elements in wine. I read a review from a wine writer just a week ago or something that said that children love fruit, adults love fermented fruit, and it should taste like fermented fruit. So the fermentation elements and the savoury elements are what I embrace as an adult. So I think the savoury elements, the elegance, there's a beautiful plumpness in the Tom Cullity palate and a really fine-grained tannin. The Cabernet Sauvignon, I think, is a little bit more obvious in its slightly more blackcurrant, slightly darker berry fruit flavours. You know, we're talking about red berries in Tom Cullity. I think the Cabernet Sauvignon is slightly more darker berried in character. You're on 17, aren't you?
Yeah, we are.
So 17 was a beautiful, cool vintage. So it is a very succulent vintage, but you'll find the tannins are a little bit more assertive in the Cabernet. I think there is like a higher volume of tannin in the Cabernet. And I love to embrace that more robust Cabernet feel at our premier level. The Tom has the finest tannins, but the Cabernet Sauvignon has tiny little berries. So when you have a higher skin to pulp ratio, you end up with a good concentration of tannin and beautiful intensity and power. So I'm not sure if that explains it without, you know, doing tasting notes. I think that's just the difference.
I think that's great. The other question, so I'm gonna bring us forward a little bit because we have some beautiful pictures and also of the barrel room too, which I just want to show because it's like I wish I was standing in there right now. It looks amazing, and I'm sure it's a big bustling hall of activity at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because you're still in the middle, obviously, of harvest. For those of you who aren't aware, Virginia is taking time out of her very, very busy harvest to do this with us, which is very exciting. So thank you again for that. But as we move forward too, because I know we have the Chardonnay as well that we're going to taste. But actually, I have an interesting question here from someone regarding your experience as a female winemaker in Margaret River. And so she was wondering this is Deborah. Hi, Deborah. She was wondering if you had found a resistance to being a winemaker who also happened to be female when you came into this sort of profession at your time, or if it was kind of all par for the course when you were there, or your experience. You were just written up in decanter. I know this, congratulations. um, as you know, but being kind of identified as a female winemaker, I think is always that kind of question you get because you're female, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of, but honestly, it's worth kind of hearing that story, I think.
Yeah, look, I mean, I am going to say that I really don't like it. I've only ever wanted to be a winemaker, not a female winemaker. I just wanted to be a great winemaker. And I was actually, I was talking about last, because it's Women's History Month, there's just so many requests coming my way. And I'm like, why are we talking about me as a woman? Can we not just talk about me as a winemaker? Because it should be irrelevant. Equality is about that being irrelevant, right? So I do get a bit frustrated, and I think it's the I never saw hurdles in my way. I just did what I wanted to do, and I don't know if I'm a little bit thick, and I just kept going like, oh, I just want to do that. I want to do that, and I'm just going to keep doing this. And success came my way because I was passionate at what I did, and I was willing to put in the hard yards, and I didn't see the hurdles. I just did what I thought I could do, and success came to me because I just loved what I did. So hurdles weren't there for me. I didn't see them. And I think I guess at the moment I'm kind of frustrated being celebrated as a female winemaker because it's actually Paul Holmes à Court who employed me who should be celebrated. If women are going to celebrate women in the industry, talk to Paul because he employed me. He didn't care whether I was a male or a female. I had passion, and he employed me because of my passion and hard work, not because I was a female. And I think he's the bloke who should be celebrated right now. If you're going to talk about celebrating, equality and, female winemakers. Sure, there's very few of us in the industry, but you know what? There's a lot of people who do not want to do the sort of work that I do because it's very difficult to have a family and do vintage. I chose not to have children because I love making wine. It's a very hard thing to do. So we have choices. Females are the most blessed of anyone. We get the choices. Most blokes don't get a choice. They have to work because they don't get pregnant and they don't have babies. So is that a little bit too passionate? Am I getting?
No, keep it coming. I love it.
I mean, for me, it is beautiful to be celebrated, but I'd rather be celebrated as a great winemaker rather than a great female winemaker.
And yes, and I think part of what you've gotten through, definitely you have, and you should be. And I think if I didn't know you as a girl, I wouldn't care. So bravo to the wines anyway.
And to be honest, I'm not negating the difficulty that some women have had working for difficult people, but I reckon there's probably some blokes out there who have worked for some difficult women as well. And I think it's, there's just difficult people to work for in life. And I think, you just have to get on with life.
Indeed. If I may switch the subject just to something else that I would like to celebrate that we were talking about earlier as well. Everyone, as a congratulations, they got organic certification just about a month ago for all of their vineyards. And I think that is definitely something to celebrate. I know I got gaga over words, but that's a big, big accomplishment to get through. That's it.
Oh, look, it's so amazing. It's a really long journey to get certified, but we didn't do this to be certified. We did it because we believe that it's a more sustainable future for our vineyards. It's better for the people in our vineyards. It's better for the wine. I rely on the wild yeast. All of our Chardonnay and Cabernet is fermented with wild yeast. That means that vineyard health has to be great, not just for the fruit, but also for the fungi, the microbiology.
Yeah.
The microbiology in the soil has to be healthy so the vine performs. So we did it for our quality. And then we went, well, I guess we should get certified because we can't really talk about how we grow our grapes without people saying, why aren't you certified? So I mean, it's obvious that we're doing it organically now because we've been certified, and it is such a beautiful thing. Yeah.
So a quick question actually about that. Have you, did you introduce wild yeast fermentation, or is that something that existed before you started taking over?
No, they had trialed some wild yeast barrels before I'd started. I learnt wild yeast fermentation from a beautiful mentor of mine in New Zealand, James Healy from Dog Point. He's great, making some amazing Chardonnay. Anyway, when I was a kid, I was assisting him in the laboratory. He was a nutty professor, and we did these incredible trials on wild yeast. And that was in 1994. And from that moment onwards, my journey has been nurturing those wild yeast. So when I came here, from a few barrels of trial, we very quickly accelerated all of the Chardonnay in 2 years to be 100% wild.
Wow.
And then I started working with Cabernet. I was always scared to do Cabernet because the alcohol's a bit higher. And I kept thinking, oh, they're not going to make it. They're not going to finish. But what I forgot was that you're fermenting all of your reds with all of the skins and all of the wild yeast. So your wild yeast numbers are higher in your reds. So once I started doing it, I kept going, do more, do more, do more. And by 2012, all of our Premier and Grand Cru sections were wild. And by 2017, 100% of our red wines were wild fermented. So it took a long time for me to get confident. And I think sometimes when you're trying to make your wines naturally, not to do something is so much more difficult than doing something. Winemakers have hundreds of decisions to make every day, and the decision not to do something is always more difficult than the decision to do something.
Especially, I feel like when all of those kind of tricks of the trade that are available to winemakers, we talk about that a lot when we talk about California and a lot of New World places where you don't have that transparency based on appellation, right? And so there is that kind of open book of 6,000 different yeast cultures that you can buy to add to your wine, to add different flavors, to do different things. And there's a lack of integrity seemingly in that. And I'm not all the time, I shouldn't make that blanket statement, but there is a sense of purity when it's the idea of being able to use everything that's just there naturally and not do anything. I really love that statement. It's very true.
Well, most of the yeast that are isolated from different regions in the world. Mm-hmm. And unless it's been isolated from your own region, it just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. And we've actually been doing lots of samples through the Australian Wine Research Institute and analysing the yeast numbers. And we have anywhere, depending on the vintage, because yeast vary from vintage to vintage on the conditions, but we have anywhere from 15 to 25 different yeasts starting the fermentation. And obviously it is the strong Saccharomyces cerevisiae that finish the fermentation because they're the alcohol tolerant ones. But the most exciting thing that AWRI told me last year is that they've isolated one yeast that they've only found in Western Australia. They haven't found it anywhere else in Australia. So I'm going, we've got our own yeast. He's cool. We haven't named it yet though. We've got to find a name.
No, you do. I mean, that's going to be the most exciting part, naming your yeast. I mean, cheers to that. That's what I'm going to say. And I'm going to cheers you with the Chardonnay since we have that up right now. And I see I've moved us forward to the beautiful soils and the berries of the Chardonnay slide.
Oh, so this is really important because Margaret River, it is quite undulating. While we don't have mountains and massive hills, we do have a lot of undulations. And obviously over time, you get, and we're coastal, so you do get more sandy, loamy conditions. So when you look at the soil type here that we work with Chardonnay, it's a lot more sandy, loamy, and a higher clay content throughout. Because Chardonnay has a weaker root system, it needs to have that clay interspersed so that it holds more moisture over the summer months. So we find sections that have deeper soils so that the roots can spread more and that have higher water retention. The picture you've got on the left is very important for Margaret River because we have this thing called gingin clone. There's, it is definitely, it's a very unique clone. It's been in Western Australia since the mid-50s, but there's a theory that it actually came from Davis University called Pinot Chardonnay at the time. But one of the key features of this clone is that it has hen and chicken. You can see in that bunch, it's like melorandage is what a lot of people call it. But hen and chicken, you get little berries and big berries, and it has this incredible concentration of flavour, and it has high acid retention. So while we're in a sort of maritime influenced area, we want to retain the acid because the maritime influence moderates the night and day temperatures. So we don't get cold, cold nights here. So you want to have that natural acid retention. So this incredible clone suits our climate beautifully.
Sorry, so gosh, that's so terrible. I'm so sorry. So hen and chicken, that's what you called it, is that right?
Yeah.
Hen and chicken is melorandage, and in this particular case, it is not a fault. It's actually a benefit of this particular clone that it is affected by this, as opposed to not. I feel like when we talk about melorandage a lot, we're like, oh, it's devastating our vineyards, but in this particular case, it's helping retain acidity.
Yeah, well, I mean, not just retaining the acidity, but there's the small berries, they've got a lot more skin to pulp ratio, and all the flavours in the skins, or just under the skin. So you get a lot of power from these little bunches. And it is a really interesting thing, my understanding from originally, and it's a really interesting concept, is that it was old Wenty clone, but then Harold Olmo at Davis University then worked out how to virus treat vines and stopped this hen and chicken from happening. So you end up with the Wenty clone, which is actually bigger bunches, and not everybody loves it because it's quite boring. But when it had the virus actually proves to be quite beneficial. It is devastating from a yield point of view. We get very low yields, but it's a really important feature of the Margaret River region, I think, and the quality of Chardonnay.
That is fascinating. Something I'd ever heard of before. So this is really, really exciting. And in this Chardonnay, I feel like one of the things about this, I think, is one of the most beautiful Chardonnays that everyone should have in their cellar at all times, because also it's incredibly, the value that this delivers for the price point that we get it for is insane. Just absolutely insane. So this is just, please tell us all about this beautiful Chardonnay that we're drinking.
So this is the Filius. So this is our village level, believe it or not. So, we've got a Premier Cru, which is our Vasse Felix Chardonnay, and our Grand Cru, which is our Heytesbury Chardonnay. But all of our Chardonnay is cloudy juice, fermented wild in barrique. We don't just because it's village, Chardonnay is still very high value for us. So I will admit that this is only about 30% gingin clone. We have lots of other clones. So the lots of other clones tend not to be the Premier and Grand Cru class. But the way we craft this wine is so that it reflects the house style, which is very much that high solids, wild yeast fermentation, a little bit of oak intervention, but none of these things should stand out. Delicate, fine fruit, just beautiful savoury complexities that come into the wine from the secondary elements. And that's the beauty of great Chardonnay. The secondary characteristics make it the most amazing variety in the world, because it's a chameleon. It takes on its environment. So Chardonnay is very much a house style concept. So I think they even talk about in Burgundy, producer. Forget your village, Grand Cru, Premier Cru, go to your house style, because the house style is the thing that you relate to and that you fall in love with. And, you might have their Grand Cru at the, on your birthday, a Premier Cru on the weekend, and then the village every day of the week, if you're a Chardonnay lover.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I see this wine as every day of the week. I want a great Chardonnay that smells of class, of savoury elements, of quality. It's everything that I want in a Chardonnay. This is just a little bit lighter in weight than you'll see in our Premier and Grand Cru, but it's so refreshing. For people who fell out of love with Chardonnay, this is the converter.
Absolutely, and that's a great point. I feel like, especially when we talk about California and the California approach to Chardonnay that has come, and not recently, we're getting beautiful Chardonnays now, but yes, that heavy style, that buttery style. As part of the process of this still goes through malolactic fermentation, or does it not? Yeah,
and it's still 100% fermented in oak. So
amazing.
It's only 15% new oak. But people have blamed oak and blamed malolactic fermentation for bad Chardonnay. But I think quite often it's picked too ripe, where the acids, it's lost its acid. It's too fruity. So for me, the most important thing about Chardonnay is to harvest at that al dente quality. So it's, not underripe and not overripe. If you get that al dente ripeness, you'll have the finesse. You'll get the citrus tones, but some of the more sort of tropical, peachy tones. You'll end up with a little bit, that perfect line of both. And then you have a beautiful transparent wine that you can layer all those beautiful secondary complexities over.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what the wine speaks to, I think, to me, because all of it so bad, like it's just a pure, seamless experience from across the palate, all of the fruit, all of that secondary kind of texture and flavor, and just in such a subtle and seamless way that it just has, I just think it's absolutely beautiful, and I love this wine very much. So I'm super excited that we got to taste it with this. And so I hope everyone is. We are getting close to the end of our hour. I can't believe it's here already. But I did want to say, who else, if anyone has any questions, any additional questions. So we didn't get to talk a little bit about the beautiful group trip that we're all going to take to visit Virginia in Margaret River. But this is here, right? This is where we're going to come visit you. Is that right?
Exactly.
This is the estate.
So yeah, we have a cellar door and a restaurant. One thing in Australia is that cellar door, you don't need to always make bookings. You can just drive from cellar door to cellar door and taste wine. It's brilliant. Mm-hmm. And we have an incredible restaurant, and Brendan, our chef, who's amazing, and he respects wine first and then makes food that doesn't clash with the wine, because we're a wine house at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And his food is exceptional. It is really beautiful. He takes a lot of inspiration from Japanese cuisine, those umami flavors, but just plays in the delicacy of great food to go with our delicate lined wines. We've got the power, but we're not, I don't want to have a meal with a wine that's a, punch in the face. It's a meal unto itself. Our wines, you can drink them on their own, but they're beautiful with a meal.
And actually, I didn't earlier, but Dan was drinking the Cabernet Sauvignon with a burger and truffle fries, I believe it was, and he said it was spectacular. It went very, very well, right?
Oh, that's my favorite. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know, right? I mean, burger and truffle fries, always. So before we go, can we end with a story about where the name Vasse Felix comes from? Because it's kind of a fun story.
Oh, absolutely. So Tom Cullity, who planted the vines and named Vasse Felix, he was a cardiologist and a, amazing and very eccentric doctor. He was also a historian. Of course, being a doctor, he studied Latin. So he had all these different influences. And when he was looking at naming Vasse Felix, he'd read these history reports about Thomas Timothy Vasse, who was a French explorer who disappeared off a longboat off the coast of Margaret River, the Margaret River region. And this is in 1801. So he disappeared, and there's this great mystery as to where Thomas Timothy Vasse, did he drown? Did he end up living with the Aborigines on the shore? there's other stories that say that he was picked up by a English ship that took him back to the UK, and he was locked up as a prisoner. All sorts of mystery stories. So it was a fascinating story for Tom Cullity. So Vasse was really important, but he introduced Felix, which means fortunate or lucky. So he wanted this place to be the lucky Vasse or the fortunate Vasse, you know, and it's a little tribute to the man who disappeared in a great story. And I think it is beautiful because it's a beautiful historical region.
And then I think there's also a fun story about, on all of your labels, you have this lovely bird. Yes?
The peregrine falcon.
So tell us about that.
So, and look, the peregrine falcon is on Tom's very first bottle of wine in 1972. The peregrine falcon has never left. But the story is that the peregrine falcon did leave. We've got a lot of, because we're such a beautiful natural environment, so many trees in this area, we have small birds that if the trees are not blossoming in the region during harvest, the birds get very hungry for the grapes and they peck all of the grapes, and it can cause incredible damage. So Tom's first crop was completely destroyed by birds, and he was going, how am I going to stop the birds from eating my crop? And it's like the old, you know, the lady who ate a spider to eat the fly. Have you ever heard that from?
Yeah.
Like, get the predatory bird out to get rid of the small birds. So there was a falconer. This is back in, you know, early 70s. There was a falconer living in Margaret River. Margaret River attracts incredible people. So he asked this falconer if he could train a falcon to fly over the vineyard at harvest, you know, just before harvest, so that he could train it to live around the vineyard and scare the small birds away. So this falcon was trained over 12 months to fly over the vineyard and fly back, fly over the vineyard. And then as vintage came up, they set the bird free to fly over the vineyard to scare the birds off, and the falcon flew off into the distance and never came back. So I think when Tom designed his first label, he just put the bird on the label as the protector of Vasse Felix wine.
So he came back.
He came back to protect it.
I am so grateful. Thank you so much, Virginia. This has been amazing. I'm really, really grateful to have you here. It's been so nice to meet you. And everyone, get more, the wines are still at High Time. If you didn't have them tonight, or if you want more of them, you can get them there. I'm just so thrilled to have you, Virginia, and best of luck with the rest of harvest and life and all of the things. And hopefully we see you here soon when everything opens up and we can come visit too.
Thank you so much. We're incredibly lucky here. It's great. But if you can't come here, just smell Margaret River in the glass. Yeah. I think it's the best way to travel. Travel in wine.
I agree. Travel in wine. Cheers to that. And absolutely to everyone. So I will let everyone go. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. You guys, Erin and Virginia, have a wonderful day.
Will do.
Everyone, cheers, and I will see some of you tomorrow. And Virginia, I hope to see you soon at some point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye.